everybody, welcome back. I hope you're with us on the main stage, coming back from all those conversations in the room. Ben and I have, first of all, Ben, how was it for you? Where were you? Where did you spend the last half hour?
Good. All over the place. I always find it really tough to stay in one location for these chats, and it's quite nice to take a bit of a back seat and just see what other people are saying. So I took a few notes of things to share. One, I saw some really interesting chat around workplace culture and kind of referencing how when you are working somewhere, you almost become like a little bit numb sometimes to what's going on when you're there day to day, and kind of your moral compass and ethics sometimes they're gradually worn down, and it becomes the norm, and you're obviously conscious, like in a kind of like climate like we're in now, speaking up against someone and maybe putting your job at risk. And yeah, gradually that can be a slippery slope. Miles was talking about the value exchange when you give away your data. He referenced like his Tesco club card. He's quite happy to give that data, and he knows in return he's going to be served a number of ads, but actually sometimes it's a lot more manipulative. I saw people talking about data literacy as well, and I guess how casual it is. You know, we see terms and conditions and notes about our cookies pop up all the time, and we sort of revert to the quickest solution rather than actually considering what's going to happen. And even like the way it's branded, right? Cookies we associate with a nice taste and something good. So it's kind of crazy. And then the final piece I thought was really good. I popped into the session about like, what can we do, right? What's the action we can take? What can we actually, yes, this is a crazy world we're in right now. What can we do to try and improve this? And one metaphor reference Carl was using was kind of talking about paradigm shifts and revolutions, and how when we first got cars, people would drive around without seatbelt, and that was totally normal. And it got to a point where people were like, okay, actually, this isn't that safe. We need to all wear seatbelts, and we all do now. Or before the Industrial Revolution, kids were going in chimneys, and that was okay. And he was kind of referencing how we're hopefully not far off a point now where people are going, okay, cool, we need to put some measures in place. Yes, we're all going to use this thing and we need it, but how do we make it a bit more safe? And there's some really interesting conversation kind of flowing off of that. So yeah, all around, loads of interesting bits and bobs.
Fantastic. Well, talking of solutions, it's really exciting. We're now joined by two leaders of the free world, Inga and Jodie, both doing in completely different projects, but doing fantastic things. Jodie's been a part of Rebel Book Club for a few years, and we met her already, and we'll come to you in a minute, Jodie. But Inga, welcome to Rebel Book Club for the first time. Where are you?
Thanks for having me. I'm in Berlin, Germany.
Berlin, Germany is your home. And what is the project and the mission that you're on there?
Well, I'm managing director of Ich bin hier, which translates to I am here. And I am here is twofold. It is, first of all, a counter-speech action group with 45,000 people on Facebook trying to counter hate speech and disinformation, and doing so since the end of 2016. So we're almost 4 years old. And the second pillar of I'm Here is that we are educating people with offline and online training on how to live digital civil courage, and to make the internet a better place.
So not ambitious at all with those projects. Tell us a little bit more about.
No, it's fine. I think it'll be soon done.
Soon done. Ticked off. Onto the next thing. So, like we all witness, that from light trolling all the way through to awful hate speech and the impact that can have. Although a lot of us obviously don't feel that, we're in our own little bubbles. But what is the reality of what's going on, and how are you going about tackling it? What do you do? What does your community do?
Well, the reality is pretty grim. I mean, that is why the group was founded originally almost 4 years ago, because the columns, the comments on Facebook are dismal. The hate and the extent of dehumanizing comments, dehumanizing language, it's insane. And what we wanna show people is that it's worth the while to post more humane, more factual comments based on just very, very low-level common grounds, as like sticking to our constitution and sticking to human rights. And other than that, we do not have any specific type of positioning in the group. It's just let's adhere to our constitution. You know, that's our bottom line. and it's worth the while if you categorize the different types of hate speakers out there. You know how to work with them. You know that not to feed the troll, but still like post one comment that lets the silent reader know this is not real, this is not mainstream, this is not okay to say. And there are different types that you can actually engage with, try to convince to come back to the positive, good side. And well, the most importantly, let the silent reader know that this is not okay. So our discursive culture doesn't go down the drain for good.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it sounds pretty ambitious. We're trying to like defend democracy. I don't know, because what we're seeing online it's pretty dismal.
And does this story of manipulating people through data that we've been looking at this month with this about Cambridge Analytica, the great hack, is this a consequence? Is the rise of hate speech a consequence of that?
Well, I'd say it feeds each other. Well, one of the reasons that the group was founded was also what we saw 2016, of course, with Trump and then Brexit and in Germany. I don't know if you're aware, but the public opinion was very ambiguous in 2015 about the refugee situation. And all of these events were, as we now know, also heavily influenced by troll factories and what we saw, what we read about in Mindf. So this is for sure something that is like triggering and enhancing each other. But we see that with this hate being accelerated in the digital space, we see that people feel like things become sayable, speakable, and then at the end of the day maybe doable, that have not been thinkable before. And the amazing thing is that the amazing in the worst possible way thing is that this absolutely spills over into the analog world. I mean, a lot of people think, why would you want to engage? Why want to put so much time in like conversations on the internet? I mean, these are just pixels. But that's not how it works. It frames how people think. It changes how people vote. It changes what people do. Walter Lübcke was a politician. He was shot last year, a little over 1 year ago, by someone who radicalized himself online. So yeah,
it's the other side of the problem. And in terms of, so tell us a little bit about what your group, your community does. And Diana's asking, can we join internationally? How does it work? And what's the positive impact that it's having?
Yeah. So how it's working is that we have a community, a group on Facebook, and we have a team of 25 people who volunteer as moderators of the group, and they put in all the work. They frame the whole work of the group. They choose the columns, the articles where the group gets active. All the members, of course, can also post comments that they have made and link them so that other people can join them in the conversations. And we try to work with the algorithms because a large group like ourselves can try to become visible and try to change the tone of a column. If you post a couple of heavily visible top-level comments and then have a large group of people interacting with these comments become relevant to the algorithm. So that's why that's how you can make a more humane perspective seen in the column. And actually we did some scientific proof. The University of Düsseldorf, they examined 14,000 top-level comments and their 5 first answers. And the professor showed that setting a tone in the top-level comments triggers more humane reactions. So just putting a more humane perspective out there actually can influence the whole conversation.
Yeah,
And about joining,
Yeah.
we do have national groups in 14 countries. We have I Am Here International. You can find it on Facebook. And we have 14 national chapters.
It almost reminds me of like you're kind of a human correcting version of the Wikipedia folk sort of tribe, where, you know, people are going on there sorting out the facts. Like your community is actually going in there and leading like how to be, you know, a better version of yourself, of a person online, which is, it's an amazing thing that people are doing. But clearly people enjoy it and get quite a lot out of it. What are the benefits of it for the people who are participating?
Well, of course, it's for someone who wants to volunteer and do something positive in the world. This is a very flexible way to do so, because you can just fit it around your own schedule whenever you can make the time. You don't have to stick to a schedule, certain days, certain events, but there's always one of the actions going on where you can engage. So if you want to contribute something positive to the world, this can be something to help reshape the digital discourse. Other than that, of course, it can be very gratifying if you can see how the tone of such a conversation changes every so often. You actually just have a discourse with someone who might, at the end of the day, say, okay, I do see I may have chosen the wrong language, or interesting to see this perspective. But full disclosure, this is not going to happen every day or every time you engage. A lot of times this will just be setting a counterpoint to the hate and not winning someone over. But you always have to realize that we try to explain also in our trainings, in our coachings, that a lot of what we do is for the silent reader, because a lot of people don't engage themselves. They just come to the comment columns to make up their mind, see what other people are thinking about it. And we need to show them there's more out there than
it's a really good insight, the silent reader, and it reminds me of like the structure. There's a theory on how communities behave both in real life and online, which is 1% lead, 4% engage, in other words, join the conversation positively or negatively, 95% watch. And you see that with events and everything else. Inga, we could talk a lot more about this, but I'm going to jump over to Jodie. So Jodie, last time we connected with you in person was when we read your book, which I think was in November last year, which feels like more than a year ago, I have to say, in all our lives. But tell us about your book and your work, and where you're up to on this journey, and obviously how it relates to what we're talking about tonight.
So my work really focuses on, it was about the news and mental health, really. And obviously most people now get their news from social platforms. So it kind of links in, and it's through this kind of more political discussion and more kind of news or fake news areas that people are being persuaded, or, you know, that's it. That nice plug. Thank you.
Back to front. You Are What You Read by Jodie Jackson.
Thank you. And it was really personalizing it, because I think when you kind of look at industry and trying to think about changing this huge organization or a culture, it can seem kind of overwhelming to the point of you can become paralyzed into doing nothing. But when you think about changing your own behavior and becoming aware of the impact that something has on you personally, it becomes a lot more manageable, and you feel a lot more empowered to be able to actually affect change in your own life. And what happens as a result when we do that collectively is we then have this more seismic shift towards industry, but it kind of starts from the inside out. And that's why my book focuses on the impact of the news on our mental health, and specifically the negativity bias in the news, because it is so toxic and harmful and present in our media environment. And so I talk about looking at solutions. And it was really interesting hearing at the beginning of the conversation when Geraldine was talking about giving a platform to these kind of philanthropist organizations that don't necessarily get the same airtime, but they're what happens after the problem arises. You know, they're the people solving it, but it's not necessarily the story that we're often told. So it's you know, in journalism, you've got the who, what, where, when, why. The constructive element is the what next, what happens after the problem. because it's recognizing that that isn't necessarily the end of the story. And that's why I find this conversation particularly interesting now, because there is a huge problem and it's overwhelming to the point where, you know, people do just become accepting of it. And it's how we can re-energize ourselves and empower ourselves to feel able to be part of a system that's going to change that, either in our own lives or, you know, more collectively and sort of on a wider scale, change the whole world again.
And starting with small steps, just remind us briefly of the sort of the tips and the tactics we can do. We talked about, I remember joining something like Tortoise News and Media, following them, and what are the sort of things we can do to start to change our relationship with the negative news bias and falling into this being manipulated by big data? What can we do?
Well, become aware that you are manipulated first and foremost. You know, I think
we are now.
Yeah, I think we're all aware now. But any industry that's gone through a sustained change towards a more positive purpose has relied on a conscious consumer. It's absolutely necessary that we are deliberate about our choices and we consume in a conscious way that leads to a longer term goal than just our immediate impulses or pleasures. So when it comes to the news, for example, you mentioned Tortoise Media, and that's a great way to start, is read slow journalism, because the world doesn't change that quickly. And even if it does, we still need time to make sense of its events. So you don't need to watch the news every second of every day. If you did, you'd be oversupplied and underinformed. There's no point. And the second way that I would suggest as well is to come offline, read print journalism. So subscribe to quarterly news magazines or weekly news magazines that give a slightly longer time frame on an issue. And you're not then kind of in this space where you can hyperlink yourself down rabbit holes of information. So it's quite nice to, and you also step outside of your own echo chamber. So I think coming offline to educate yourself on current affairs and news is a really good place to start. And then if you want to learn more about it, because even the news is a fairly superficial education of the world anyway, you know, even Carol Cadwallad's fantastic expose in The Guardian, think about the level of depth we've had to go into since to fully, even then, not fully understand it. So, you know, be aware that it is an impression of the world. And if you do want to go online to find out more, then you're kind of more focused in your search rather than scrolling. Yeah.
And it's been hard this year, right? With the pandemic and everything. Jodie, just tell us briefly about your kind of your new project, because it does relate to this topic about what happens next.
So I have created a children's book called Little Ruffle and the World Beyond. And it's because I have a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old now. But my daughter, when this was kicking off, I thought, how do I explain what's going on in the world to her? And I didn't like the way that the news was, you know, framing the whole thing. Again, it's looking at problems continuously. And actually, there's so much value in looking at solutions and understanding where progress is taking place, to understand how issues are being dealt with, and to empower ourselves and inspire ourselves to realize that our actions were able to make a difference. And I didn't want her just accepting that the world is a tragic and terrible place and just growing up with that expectation through watching the news. So I created this book with online resources to help children become, so the sort of categories they can become are empowered explorers or hopeful heroes or solution seekers, to be able to help them navigate the news successfully, to be able to get a much wider and hopefully more accurate picture of the world and its current state of affairs.
That's brilliant. So there's a Christmas present to go there. Little Ruffle, where can we find it? Or we'll share the links. We already have. We'll share it again. Jodie, it's really exciting to hear. Elaine, welcome back. We've got about 3 minutes before we have to wrap up, and we've got to say hello to some literacy pirates before we go tonight. Very important. But Elaine, what's the solution?
Well, I just wanted to say one thing off the back of Jodie, and something that we were also discussing in the group, is that, you know, so often when we click or when we scroll or go down those rabbit holes, we're trying to sort of fix or assuage something in ourselves, whether it's actually fear or whether it's anxiety or whether it's, you know, sort of questing after certainty in an extremely complex kind of world. And I think in terms of self-awareness, you know, that's a really, really important dimension to cultivate awareness in ourselves and in our kids that we're bringing up in this digital world, that we kind of seek to, even though it's not working, if we're sort of endlessly seeking online to kind of feel better, feel safer, feel less anxious, and sort of understanding other ways of responding to that than kind of getting stuck in this loop and sort of making ourselves vulnerable to manipulations by forces who would seek to prey on exactly those vulnerabilities is some of the most important digital literacy that we can teach ourselves and others. So that's just a roundup comment from me, really. That's
a great comment. And Inga, when you're in the depths, or your community leaders are in the depths of fighting is the wrong word, but like trying to bring people over from the dark side of abuse online, how do you stay positive about it? Because a lot of us are feeling overwhelmed just from reading the book and watching the documentary, let alone working on the front line of it. So how do you and your community stay focused and positive and optimistic?
Well, that's also a point that we do stress in our trainings a lot. That self-care is really important, and that you need to know your boundaries, set your boundaries, and stick to them. And when you feel overwhelmed, when you're not feeling your best, you can always, and you should always, step back. Also take breaks from counter speech, take maybe even breaks from social media in total, and just take the time to recharge, because honestly, sometimes it gets hard to stay positive. And just the community is so helpful. The community of our group, where we also have formats for the group to get in dialogue, to exchange with each other, and to reflect upon what's been going on. And these formats are of enormous importance to the group, to just pick each other up when things are getting rough.
And just to wrap a quick round the table, what's the habit, your relationship with social media, the media, data that's made your life better? What have you done? What have you changed that's made your life better as a result? Inga.
Oh, this is probably a pretty bad answer for someone doing what I do, but I just pretty much stopped posting on Facebook.
Except when you're converting trolls to the right side. That sounds meaningful enough. Ben, what about you?
I think slightly more intentional use of, like, I referenced digital minimalism earlier, so I've like explored taking like a longer extended breaks from social media. So I did a month last year. And I think now also when you use social media for work, right, it's very easy to be on it constantly. So just being a bit more intentional about that time and carving out like an hour on a Sunday to plan a few things and then let them roll out.
He's a calm man, this guy. Doesn't get overwhelmed by it. Elaine, what's the habit you've changed that's made a positive impact?
I've stopped sharing information involving any other person without their consent. So, things that I might have shared formally and tagging people or sharing something about my kid or something like that, I have stopped 100%.
Wow. That's a really clear line. It's just like a rule that you've created, and then you know where you stand with that. I like that.
I don't want to be making choices about other person's privacy. I don't want to increase the lack of control that there already is in this domain.
And this was an insight for me reading the book, was that of course you can turn your data off, or you can say I'm opting out or I'm not. I don't care about how my data is used, but your connections, it doesn't matter. You're still connected to lots of other people, of course. The web is strong, so we're in a privileged position in that way. What about yourself, Jodie?
So not just reducing the quantity, but increasing the quality. So being deliberate about curating your sources online, or who you're looking at through your social platforms, to be able to persuade yourself in a much more empowering and inspiring way, and see other sides of the world and people that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise.
Fantastic. Oh, well, listen, I could talk to all of you for a lot longer, but Jodie, Inga, and Elaine, again, thank you for joining us.